Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the vlog. I find myself in a unique position today. Both my wife and my daughter have plans out of town that don't involve me, so I find myself with nothing to do on a Saturday afternoon. So, decided to come up and play some cards. I'm going to jump into the 1-2, and I think I'm actually going to get on the list for the 2-5. Now, I know what I said in episode 1.
I'm playing low stakes poker. I'm probably always going to play low stakes poker.
But you know what? Sometimes you gotta take a chance, right? So anyway, start at the 1-2, move to the 2-5 after that. Let's get to it. When I arrived at 1-2, I was seated at a table with a vlog watcher, Jay, super nice dude, super active on the channel. I wasn't at the 1-2 table for very long. I played 2 hands, neither of them very well, and then I got called for the 2-5. We were opening up a brand new 2-5 table, so there weren't any super deep stacks, which made me a little bit more comfortable. In this first hand, we're in the big blind and we look down at ace queen of spades. There are 2 callers from early position before it folds around to the small blind, who raises it up to $20. I decide to go ahead and put the 3-bet in here and test the waters, and I 3-bet to $65. It folds all the way back around to the small blind, who makes the call. We're off to a flop heads up. The flop is 10-5 deuce rainbow. The small blind checks, and I probably need to be betting here, but I decided to just go ahead and check and take a free turn. The turn is a 2 of spades, so I've picked up a flush draw. The small blind leads on this card for $75. I go ahead and make the call, looking to make my flush. We're off to the river. The river is a 9 of hearts, and I don't get there. The small blind bets out for $125, and I don't think I can beat anything, so I fold. There's a button straddle. We're in the small blind, and we look down at pocket kings. I open up the action for $40, and the button is actually the only caller, so I'm off to a flop out of position heads up. The flop is 10 jack 5 with 2 hearts. And as the flop's being dealt, I'm being told I'm actually being moved to the main game, and it kind of distracted me for a second. I let out on this flop for $75, and my opponent called, so we're off to the turn. The turn is a queen of hearts. It's an interesting card, bringing in the flush, but also giving me an open-ended straight flush draw. I'm pretty sure I have the king of hearts, but not positive. Remember, I was notified during the beginning of the hand that I was switching tables, and I want to avoid doing a heart check if possible. I check to see what my opponent's going to do, and he bet $75. It's back on me. I have about 400 in my stack. I'm not sure if there's any sense in calling because I won't really know where I'm at on any non-heart river, so I decide to go ahead and jam for $415 total instead. The button thinks. He doesn't seem to be happy about the 3rd heart, and he eventually folds. I really liked this table. It was brand new, so there's no monster stacks, and the action seemed to be good for the short time while I was there, but I moved over to the main game with $680 in my stack. At the main game, we're under the gun. We look down at pocket tens. I open the action for $25. The button is the only caller. We're off to a flop heads up. The flop is king jack 9 with 2 hearts. I check, and the button checks behind, so we're off to the turn. The turn is a 10 of diamonds, so it gives me a set, but it brings on a second flush draw. I lead out on this card for $60, and the button folds. We're in the big blind when we look down at ace 4 of hearts. Under the gun opens the action to $15. It folds all the way around to the button, who calls, and I decide to go ahead and make the call. We're off to the flop 3 ways. The flop is ace king jack rainbow, so I've caught a piece here. It checks to the button, who bets $30. I make the call with my top pair, and under the gun folds. We're off to a turn heads up. The turn is an ace of clubs, so it makes it way less likely I'm up against an ace. I check, and my opponent bets $55. With this board being as connected as it is, I think it's time to start getting money in now rather than later, so I put in the check raise to $180. My opponent thinks about it, but then he folds and I win. There's another button straddle. We're in +1, and we look down at pocket aces. The small blind, the big blind, and under the gun all fold, and I raise to $35. It folds all the way around to the button straddler, who ends up folding. I may be raising a bit too large. We're on the button when we look down at ace 8 of clubs. Under the gun makes the call, and then +1 raises to $25. I go ahead and make the call, as does under the gun. We're off to the flop 3 ways. The flop is 6, 7, 10 with 2 clubs, so pretty decent flop. It checks to me, and I bet out for $60. Under the gun is my only caller. We're off to the turn heads up. The turn is a 5 of clubs, so I've made my flush. It checks to me, and I bet out for $85. Once again, under the gun makes the call, so we're off to see a river. The river is a 4 of clubs, and I'm not sure if this is a good card or a bad card, but under the gun ends up leading for $125. He has about 320 behind, so I think there's really only one play, and that's to jam all in. He doesn't think too long, and then he makes the fold. We were in the big blind this time. We looked down at ace-10 offsuit. Under the gun and +1 both make the call. It folds around to the small blind who calls, and so I decided to go ahead and raise to $25. Under the gun and +1 call, the small blind folds, we're off to a flop 3 ways. The flop is ace-deuce-3 rainbow. I bet out on this flop for $45, and both my opponents fold. So I've been playing for about an hour and a half, and I'm feeling really comfortable at these higher stakes. It's my turn to straddle from the button, and I look down at queen-10 of clubs. It folds to under the gun, who bumps it up to $35. It folds around to me, and I decide to go ahead and make the call. We're off to a flop. The flop is 10-king-6 with 2 spades. Under the gun leads on this card for $50, and it seems like a pretty good price considering I caught a piece, so I go ahead and make the call. We're off to the turn. The turn is an ace of spades, so it brings in the front door flush. Under the gun thinks and then bets out $80. With the ace and the king of spades out there, I put him less on some sort of spade draw and much more on a 1-pair or 2-pair hand, so I end up making the fold. We're on the button when we look down at king-10 offsuit. There is one caller before it gets to +2 who raises up to $20. I make the call, the blinds fold, but under the gun comes along, we're off to a flop 3 ways. The flop is 10-7-4, so I've got top pair here. It checks to me, and I bet $50. Both players make the call, so we're off to the turn. The turn is a 6, so it's connecting this board more and more, but once again the action checks to me. I decide to lead out for $150 on this card, and they both end up making the fold, and I win. We're in the big blind, and we look down at pocket 10s. There are 2 early position callers before a late position player raises to $25. It folds to me, and I make the call. Under the gun calls as well, and +2 folds. We're off to a flop 3 ways. The flop is king-10-8, so I flop middle set here. I want to start getting money in the pot immediately while I'm ahead, so I bet out for $60. Under the gun and the button both make the call. We're off to the turn. The turn is a 2 of spades, so it brings in the spade flush draw. I bet out on this card for $200. Under the gun folds, and it's on the button. The button is deep in the tank here, but he ultimately ends up making the fold. In a hand I didn't play so well, we're on the button and we look down at 10-7 of spades. It folds to +1 who makes the call, and it folds all the way around to me. And this is a spot where I should be raising 100% of the time, especially given that I'm on the button. However, I elect to just flat call. The small blind calls and the big blind checks. We're off to a flop. The flop is 10-queen-deuce rainbow. It checks to me, and I bet out $15. Both players make the call, so we're off to the turn. The turn is a 7 of hearts, so I've turned 2 pair now. It checks to me, and I bet out for $40. The small blind then min clicks to $80. Then +1 makes the call. So I consider re-raising here. The small blind has about $450 behind him, so if I raise and he comes over the top, I'm going to be in a really tough spot. So I elect to just make the call. We're off to the river. The river is a 3 of clubs, shouldn't really change anything. The small blind leads on the river for $175. +1 folds and it's back to me. The small blind is an older gentleman who hasn't played many hands past the flop. I worry it's a set, but I double block 2 combos of sets. I start thinking it might be ace-queen of hearts. A raise with top pair and a flush draw on the turn is a move that I would consider. And the bet on the river could be more of a blocker bet so that he can name his own price. I talk myself into making a call, and the small blind ends up rolling over pocket deuces for the flop set. I should have known better than that. That's a big difference between 1-2 and 2-5. If you make a misstep at 2-5, it can be expensive. I went absolutely card dead for over an hour after this, and it got so bad that I was desperate for anything like suited connectors. It would be the best thing I had seen in a while. I'm in +1 and I look down at ace-jack of diamonds. It folds to me and I open the action for $15. I get calls from the button, the small blind, and the big blind, so we're off to a flop 4 ways. The flop is jack 5-5, so I flop 2 pair here. It checks to me and I bet $30. And everyone folds. Yahoo! At least I get to scoop some chips my way. It's been about an hour and 20 minutes since I've done so. We're in the big blind this time. We look down at queen deuce offsuit. There are 4 callers, and so when the action's on me, I check it. We're off to the flop 5 ways. Flop is deuce 9 jack with 2 spades. caught a tiny piece here. The action checks all the way through, so we're off to the turn for free. The turn is a queen of clubs, so now I've got 2 pair and it brings in a second flush draw. It checks to me, and I bet $15 here. It folds to the cutoff who calls. Everybody else after that folds. We're off to the river heads up. The river is a king of clubs. It's not a great card bringing in the flush. However, I want to get some value in case I have the best hand, and I don't want to check and risk it going check, check, so I lead for $25. The cutoff calls pretty quickly. I show my hand, and we're good. We're in the hijack this time when we look down at pocket queens. +1 bumps it up to $15. The action folds to me, and I put in the re-raise to $55. It folds to the small blind who's staring me down. I'm looking him right in his eyes, and after about 10 seconds, he ends up making the fold. +1 makes the call. We're off to the flop heads up. The flop is 3 queen 7 rainbow, so I flop top set here. The opponent checks it to me, and with no flush or plausible straight draws out there, I decide to go ahead and check behind and see the turn. The turn is a 5 of diamonds, and +1 leads on this card for $60. I ask what he has left in his stack, and he says about 255. I think a jam is way too strong and there's no way he's going to call it, but maybe I can raise and actually get him to commit his stack as a semi-bluff, so I raise to $180. He doesn't think too long though, and he folds.
Thank you. Sorry.
We're in the big blind and we look down at 7-8 offsuit. There are 3 callers, and when the action gets to me, I bump it up to 25 bucks. Only the button calls, so we're off to a flop out of position heads up. The flop is 8-10 jack, so I flop bottom pair and a gut shot straight draw. I check and the button bets out for $50. For whatever reason, I call here, and so we're off to the turn. The turn is a 4 of clubs, and I'm just sitting there staring at my opponent, and he's just looking straight ahead at the dealer. I'm waiting for him to make my action so I can figure out what to do. After a good 40 seconds or so, I ask the dealer where the action is.
I'm sorry, is the action here or on me? I'm so sorry, I checked.
It was on me the whole time. Well, that's embarrassing.
I'm so sorry.
I check, my opponent jams for 160. I just don't think I beat very much here, so I fold. We're in the cutoff and we look down at King 10 offsuit. There are 2 callers before the action gets to me, and I bump it up to $20. The big blind and the hijack are my only callers. We're off to the flop 3 ways. The flop is ace 4-7 rainbow, and the action actually checks all the way through here, so we're off to the turn. The turn is a 5 of hearts, bringing in a heart flush draw. The big blind checks, and the hijack looks like he's about to bet, so I grab a stack of chips and put them in my right hand, and he slows down and he checks. I bet $65. Both players end up folding, and I get my first bluff through at 2-5. Did grabbing the chips help? Maybe. I get a visit from Roy in episode 23. Roy's a super nice dude who said he's really enjoying the vlog, so Roy, it was really nice to see you. We're in the small blind this time, and we look down at ace-jack offsuit. There are 2 early position calls. When the action gets to me, I bump it up to $20. Under the gun, who's a tight older woman, makes the call.
What are you doing in my pot? I'm trying to bet you out, you're the pro.
As does +1, we're off to a flop 3 ways. The flop is queen high, and the action checks all the way through, so we're off to the turn. The turn is an ace, so I've got top pair now. I bet out for $40. Under the gun folds, but +1 makes the call. We're off to the river. The river is a 4, and I decide to go ahead and throw a bet of $60 out for value. I'm trying to get a crying call out of any worse ace or a queen who doesn't believe that I might have an ace. After some thinking, +1 makes the call. I show, and I win. In a hand that's probably made the biggest lasting impression on me in a while, I'm on the button and I look down at pocket 10s. There's 1 call from an early position player, and it folds all the way around to me, and I bump it up to $25. It's back to under the gun, and he limp re-raises to $80. The action's back on me, and limp re-raises are often very strong, but I am in position with a very solid pocket pair. I think a fold here is probably just a little too nitty, so I make the call. We're off to a flop heads up. The flop is 9-9-3 with 2 diamonds, and my opponent leads into me for $110. He's got about $400 to $500 behind, and I don't want to just call and risk seeing a bad turn. If he has a hand like ace king or ace queen or even jacks, I think I can apply some real pressure by raising, so I jam all in. My opponent goes into the tank. The longer he thinks, the less I think it's an ace king or ace queen hand, and more like pocket jacks or maybe even pocket queens. He looks very uncomfortable as he can't seem to put me on a hand. After over a minute of thinking, he ends up making the call. We're off to the turn in the largest pot I've ever played in. The turn is a deuce, and the river is a jack. I don't like that. I show my hand and my opponent rolls over pocket queens. I don't hate my play here. I still think if he has any of the hands I mentioned before, he's going to have a hard time calling that flop bet. He had $514 total though, so the hit was pretty big. I went on a dinner break after this hand, and when I returned, I topped up to $800, not $600 like my original buy-in. Wasn't even thinking about that, so now I'm feeling a little bit of extra pressure having that extra money on the table. I don't have to worry too long. We're on the button and we look down at pocket aces. Under the gun calls before +1 bumps it up to $20. It folds around to me, and I put in the re-raise and I bump it up to $60. The small blind folds, and the big blind looks like she wants to call, but she ends up folding as well. +1 does make the call. We're off to the flop heads up. The flop is Jack Queen 6 rainbow. +1 checks it over to me, and I put out a C bet of $125, and he folds pretty quickly. In the last hand of the night, we're on the button and we look down at 4-5 of spades. We get a call from under the gun, and then it folds all the way around to the hijack, who bumps it up to $20. The cutoff calls, and I make the call with my suited connectors. Everybody else folds. We're off to a flop 3 ways. The flop is 3 king 7 with 2 clubs and a spade. And the hijack bets $25 here. The cutoff ends up making the call, and I feel kind of priced in to continue and just see what happens, so I make the call as well. We're off to a turn. The turn is a 7 of hearts, so pretty terrible, but the action checks through on this card, so we're off to the river. The river is another king. It's the king of clubs. The hijack checks, and the cutoff bet's $35. It's not a big bet. I don't really beat anything, so I fold, as does the hijack. After this, the table started breaking, and we lost all of the big stacks that were sitting there. I got moved to another table, but as soon as I sat down, the big stack to my right decided to rack up, so I decided to go ahead and rack up and call it a day.
All right, well, that'll do it for that episode. All in all, not a terrible night. Kind of started off playing like an asshole at 1-2, those 2 hands. I don't know. I just thought I better tighten this shit up. I'm gonna go play 2-5, and then literally 3 minutes later got called for 2-5. But I really like the 2-5 game. I like having more money in front of me. The bet sizing didn't seem too awkward. I played pretty well. I ran pretty well up until about 5.5 hours in. I make that move with the 10s. But, you know, again, I think if he has ace king, ace queen, even jacks, I think I'm putting a lot of pressure on him, and I don't think he can continue. So, you know, just one of those situations where didn't quite go my way, but I liked the play, and I really enjoyed the 2-5 game. I'm just not properly bankrolled for it. It's hard knowing that I've got so much of my roll sitting on the table. So I got to build up that bankroll a little bit so I can make the permanent move. Into the game for $875, out for $785. If you enjoy, like and subscribe. See you next time.
If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more poker content. And you can follow me on Instagram at 7cardflushpoker.